The sun sat heavy over Red Hollow, a molten coin pressed against the sky. Heat shimmered off wagon rims and boot heels, turning the main street into a mirage of dust and desperation. The crowd gathered tight around the wooden platform, whispering like crows waiting for scraps. Martha Hale stood at the center, her black dress faded to gray. One hand clutched her boy's shoulder, the other held her daughter close. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the air, cold, cheerful, final. 1 homestead, 1 acre of good soil, house half-standing but serviceable. Debts owed to the Bank of Lanton. Bidding starts at $30. No one looked at Martha. Not really. They looked through her, at the land behind her eyes, not the woman forced to sell it. 30, someone shouted. 35. 40. The numbers rose like bullets, each one striking something inside her chest. Her husband's grave lay just beyond the dry creek bed. She'd built that fence herself, hammer trembling in winter wind. Now strangers were buying it by the inch. Her son, Eli, tugged her sleeve. "Mama, we going home soon?" Her throat tightened. "Soon, baby. Just stay by me." Laughter rippled through the men as one bidder, broad-shouldered and half-drunk, stumbled forward. His hat sat crooked, his smile mean. "Ain't right, woman standing alone. Maybe I'll take the land and the lady both." The crowd chuckled, low, dirty sound. When his hand reached toward Eli, Martha moved without thought. She shoved the boy behind her and squared herself against the man, her voice shaking but sharp. "Touch him, and I swear you'll lose more than your money." The laughter stopped. Dust hung in the air like waiting judgment. The man sneered, took another step. "What you got left to fight with, widow? Pride?" Her breath came hard, eyes wide, body trembling, but she didn't move. She could take another loss, another insult, but not this. Then a voice, low and steady, cut through the heat. "Not while I'm standing." Heads turned. The speaker stood near the edge of the crowd, a tall man in a sun-bleached coat, hat pulled low. He wasn't one of them. That was clear by the silence that followed. His boots were clean but old, spurs dulled with time, and a scar cut through his left eyebrow like a mark from God's own chisel. Caleb Danner walked forward, slow as judgment. The bidder's grin faltered. Caleb stopped at the platform, reached into his coat, and dropped a leather pouch onto the table. The coins inside clinked heavy, honest. "That's the debt," he said. "Paid," the auctioneer hesitated. "She owes—" "Not anymore," Caleb said, voice calm as winter rain. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then the gavel fell, and just like that, the Hale homestead belonged to no man but itself again. Martha stood frozen, chest heaving. She couldn't find words, only a blur of heat and disbelief. Caleb met her eyes once. There was no softness there, no charm. Just something solid, like oak that had known fire and held anyway. He tipped his hat toward the children. "Ma'am, you best gather your things." When she spoke, her voice was brittle. "I didn't ask for saving." "Didn't say you did," he said. He turned, already walking toward his horse tied near the trough. The crowd began to murmur, unsure if they'd witnessed mercy or madness. The drunk bidder cursed and spat in the dirt, too cowardly to follow. Martha gathered her children, their small hands clinging to her skirt. Her pride burned hotter than the sun, but beneath it, something else. Safety. The kind she hadn't felt since before the debt, before the grave, before the world turned cruel. As they left the yard, the sheriff's deputy leaned against the post, chewing on a matchstick. He watched them pass with a smirk. "Debt ain't the only thing she owes." Caleb's stride didn't break, but Martha saw the muscle in his jaw tighten, the flicker in his eye like stormlight behind mountains. He said nothing, just opened the gate and held it until she passed through. Behind them, the town went back to its business, but the air stayed heavy, like thunder waiting for a place to fall. The ride to Red Creek took them past the edge of everything Martha had ever known. The road turned to ruts, then to nothing but tracks carved through tall grass and broken stone. The children dozed against her sides in the wagon, their small breaths warm against the night chill. Caleb rode ahead, silent, the faint clink of his spurs the only rhythm between thunderclouds. By dusk, they reached a valley where the world seemed to breathe slower. Hills folded around a scarred basin, where blackened stumps stood like grave markers, reminders of fire long past. Smoke from a lone chimney curled upward, pale and thin, swallowed by the gray sky. "This is Red Creek," Caleb said. "Ain't much left but quiet." Martha looked at the land, the ashes, the emptiness, and felt the old ache rise. "Quiet can be cruel," she said. He didn't argue, just swung down, unlatched the barn door, and led the horses in. His movements were deliberate, practiced. A man who'd long since learned to fill silence with work. The cabin waited at the hill's base, small and square, built from weathered pine. When she stepped inside, the smell of smoke and iron filled her lungs. One bed, one table, one Bible on the sill, its pages curled from years of heat. A rifle hung above the hearth, clean and oiled. Every corner spoke of solitude carefully kept. "You and the children take the bed," he said. "I'll see to the animals." Martha wanted to refuse. Pride clawed at her throat. But the sight of her son's trembling hands, the sound of her daughter's cough, left no room for argument. "Thank you," she said softly. Caleb nodded once, as if thanks were a language he didn't speak. When he returned, he set out a loaf of bread, a pot of beans, and fresh water from the well. He didn't sit, just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the rain start to fall through the open window. The first drops hissed against the coals. Then came the storm, wild, immediate. Wind rattled the shutters. Thunder rolled through the valley like a drumbeat of some forgotten war. Eli woke with a start, clutching his mother's arm. "Mama, it's all right," she whispered, though her heart raced too. The roof creaked under the weight of rain. Water seeped through a crack, running down the wall in thin silver veins. Caleb crossed the room and wedged a board against the leak. Then he pulled the chair near the hearth, set his rifle across his knees, and settled in without a word. "You don't have to," Martha began. He looked toward the window instead of her. "Storm brings things down from the hills. Wolves sometimes. Or worse," she understood. He wasn't guarding the house. He was guarding them. Hours passed. The fire's glow painted his face in gold and shadow. His eyes stayed open, unblinking, like a man who'd seen too many nights where sleep cost too much. Martha watched from the bed, her children huddled against her. Lightning flashed through the slats, catching the faint silver of the scar on his temple. "What happened here?" she asked quietly. "Raid," he said after a long pause. 3 winters back. Folks left. I stayed. Why? He adjusted the rifle, the wood creaking in his hands. "Someone has to." She wanted to ask more, but something in his tone, or maybe the look in his eyes, told her the rest was buried deep, like roots under burned soil. The storm raged, relentless. Wind howled through the valley, carrying the ghosts of Red Creek with it. But inside, the fire held. So did he. When the thunder finally eased, Martha drifted toward sleep. Her last glimpse was of Caleb still by the hearth, motionless, rifle balanced across his knees, watching the door as if daring the night to try. For the first time since the auction, she slept without fear. Morning broke thin and cold across Red Creek. Mist hung over the valley, veiling the black stumps and burned ridges like old ghosts reluctant to leave. Caleb stepped out into it, hat low, boots crunching frost, the smell of pine smoke trailing behind him. Another day of mending fences, counting cattle, pretending the world beyond his land no longer mattered. He had just lifted a gate hinge when he heard the sound of hooves. Not hurried, measured. Lawman's rhythm. The deputy rode in slow, dust clinging to his coat like guilt. His badge caught the first slant of sun. He dismounted without greeting. "Morning," Caleb said. "Morning," the deputy answered, but his tone was wrong. He drew a folded notice from his saddlebag. "Came from Lanton yesterday. Bankers expanding holdings. Red Creek's next on the list," Caleb's jaw flexed. "He already owns half the valley." Half ain't enough for his kind. The deputy looked around, the ruined hills, the cabin smoke rising in the distance. "You shelterin' that widow and her young'uns. Bank don't like that. Says it encourages disobedience." Caleb stared past him toward the ridge. Helping her paints a target on me, that it? The deputy nodded. And you know how they aim. Caleb turned back to his fence post, voice flat. Then let him aim. The deputy studied him for a moment longer, then swung back into the saddle. You'll find something at your north line, he said. Best look before dark. He rode off, leaving only hoofprints and a silence heavy as confession. Caleb worked until noon, though his thoughts weren't on the rails beneath his hands. By late afternoon, he reached the far fence, the edge of Red Creek where the valley met the ridge. Wind howled through the wire. There, nailed to a post, flapping like a wounded bird, was a torn notice stamped foreclosure. The banker's seal burned red into the corner. He pulled it free, read the words twice, then crushed the paper in his fist. His scar itched, old instinct stirring. Men like the banker didn't come with guns anymore. They came with ink and signatures that bled slower, but killed the same. Back at the cabin, the smell of damp earth greeted him. Martha knelt behind the house, hands deep in soil, her skirt dark with mud. The children helped, giggling as they dropped seeds into furrows. The sight stopped him cold. What are you planting? He asked. She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Bluebonnets, she said. My little girl loved them. Thought maybe, if they can bloom here, so can we. Her fingers pressed into the dirt with reverence, not labor. I'm calling it Grace's ground. The name lingered in the air, soft as a prayer. Caleb looked past her to the charred valley, where life still hesitated to return. This land's seen too much fire, he said quietly. That's why it deserves flowers, she replied. He almost smiled. Almost. They won't grow easy. Nothing worth keeping ever. Does. He left her then, went to the barn. The notice still burned in his pocket, edges damp with sweat. He stared at it under the lantern's light, wondering if peace was ever more than a pause between storms. That night, while Martha tucked the children in, Caleb pinned the foreclosure paper to the wall above the table, not as surrender, but as reminder. When she came out and saw it, her breath caught. They'll come? She asked. They always do, he said. But this time they'll find us waiting. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and clean. Through the window, he saw Martha's garden, tiny green shoots pushing through black soil, trembling but alive. He whispered almost to himself, let it grow. The rain came harder the next evening, slicing sideways across the valley. The kind of cold that worked through coats and bones alike. Caleb stayed out in it anyway, mending the corral fence where a flash flood had torn the posts loose. Every hammer strike echoed between the hills like stubborn defiance. Martha called from the porch. You'll catch your death out there. He didn't look up. Fence won't fix itself. By the time he trudged back toward the cabin, the light was gone. His shoulders drooped, coat soaked through, face pale beneath the brim. He stumbled once, caught himself, then fell against the doorframe. Martha reached him before he hit the floor. His skin burned under her hand. Fever already had its grip. She pulled him inside, calling for Eli to bring water, for her daughter to fetch rags. Caleb muttered something she couldn't catch, voice rough and broken, before slipping under. The storm roared outside, but inside was quieter now, the kind of stillness that feels like waiting. She set a lamp by the bed and eased off his coat. That's when she saw the scars. 2 deep puckered marks near his ribs, and another along his shoulder blade, the color of old ivory. Bullet wounds, close range, deliberate. As she pressed a wet cloth to his forehead, something slipped from his pocket, a folded piece of paper worn soft from being handled. She hesitated, then unfolded it. Only a few lines were legible through the smudges of dirt and rain. I forgive you for my brother. No name. No signature. Just that sentence, trembling like the hand that wrote it. Martha set the letter aside, her heart caught between curiosity and dread. The man who'd saved her life carried ghosts that still spoke to him. Hours passed. The fever rose. His breath came ragged, sweat beading across his temples. She sat by him, wiping his brow, whispering fragments of hymns her mother once sang when she was small. The children slept on the floor by the hearth, curled in blankets. When dawn broke, thin and silver, Caleb stirred. His eyes opened, distant, unfocused, then found her. How long? He rasped. All night, she said. You were burning up. He tried to sit, winced, and fell back. She poured water into a tin cup and lifted it to his lips. Drink slow. He drank, then looked toward the table where the folded letter lay. His face changed. You read it? I did. He turned away, jaw tightening. It ain't signed, she said softly. But it's forgiveness, isn't it? He stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then, without looking at her, said, It means I killed the wrong man. The words hung between them, heavier than thunder. Martha's hands froze around the cup. You don't mean I was a deputy once, he said. Before this place, before the fire. We raided a camp in the hills. Someone tipped us off wrong. I thought I was stopping a killer. Turns out I was making one. Silence settled. Outside, the storm faded to drizzle. I've been paying for it since, he added. Every day I fix something broken, hoping one of them makes up for what I broke then. Her anger sparked first. For the lie. The secret. But it flickered out quick beneath something deeper. Pity. Recognition. You still carry that letter, she said. It's the only thing that lets me remember he was human. So was I. She folded the cloth, wrung it out. Then you already paid more than the rest of us ever will. He met her eyes then, raw, unguarded. You don't know what it's like to lose everything for one mistake. Yes, I do, she said quietly. My husband believed men like your banker kept their word. Signed everything they put before him. Lost it all by the time he realized the ink was blood. Caleb exhaled slowly. Guess we both trusted the wrong kind. She smiled faintly, a weary sort of smile. Then maybe we can learn to trust again, just different people this time. He nodded once, eyes closing. The fever began to break. Martha sat back, exhausted, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, at least for now. She looked at the letter again, its edges curling in the lamplight, and tucked it beneath his folded coat. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. When she finally slept, her head against the chair's edge, the fire dimmed to embers. Caleb murmured her name once in his dreams, not loud, just enough to reach her before the dawn. Outside, the garden soil glistened under the first sunbeam, tiny green blades pushing through the mud like promises kept. The days stretched long and golden after the storm. The air smelled of new grass and wet soil, and the creek finally ran clear again. Martha's garden began to take hold, rows of beans, corn, and the tender bluebonnets that had survived the rain. Their tiny blossoms lifted toward the sun like small defiances against memory. Caleb worked beside her some mornings, fixing fences or splitting logs. He didn't speak much, but his silence had softened. It no longer felt like distance, just steadiness, the kind that held the world together while it healed. Eli followed him everywhere now, mimicking his gait, asking questions about horses and rifles and how to tell weather by the sky. Caleb answered each one in short, patient tones, the corners of his mouth sometimes twitching toward a smile. One afternoon, he took the boy to the meadow behind the barn. The wind there carried the scent of sage and wild rye. Hold the reins loose, Caleb said. Let him feel your hands but not fear them. Eli nodded, small fingers tight around the leather. The horse snorted, uncertain, then began to move, a slow circle first, then a steady walk. Martha watched from the fence, her heart swelling as her son laughed for the first time in months. The sound carried clear across the field, high and alive. Caleb caught her watching. He tipped his hat, the briefest acknowledgement, then turned back to the boy. The gesture was nothing, and everything. That evening, the wind shifted cool again. Martha hung damp laundry on the line behind the cabin, the sky burning pink above the ridge. The shirts snapped in the breeze, and somewhere nearby, a hammer tapped, steady, rhythmic. She followed the sound to the porch. Caleb sat on the step, mending her late husband's coat. The thread glinted silver in the dying light. Eli's old boots sat beside him, polished clean. You don't have to do that, she said. He didn't look up. Figured the boy might need something fit for Sunday. Jacket's seen better days, but so have we. Martha stood there a moment, unable to speak. That coat had hung untouched since the day of the burial. She'd meant to burn it once, too heavy with memory. but couldn't. Now it was coming back to life beneath the same hands that saved her children. Something shifted inside her. Quietly, she said, "Thank you." Caleb nodded once, tying off the last stitch. Man shouldn't grow up thinking the world only takes. Let him wear proof it gives back sometimes. As night fell, they shared supper in near silence, the children already asleep by the fire. Outside, coyotes called across the valley. The sound used to chill her, but tonight it felt distant, harmless, just another voice in the dark. Later she found him still by the hearth, staring into the flames. The lamplight brushed against his face, softening the lines of sorrow carved there. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. He shook his head. "Done enough of that. Now I just fix what's left." She hesitated, then sat across from him. "I used to think home was a place you earn, but maybe it's simpler. Maybe it's where the children stop fearing night." He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken flickering behind his eyes. Then he said quietly, "Then maybe I'm home too." Outside, moonlight poured through the window, falling over the patch of bluebonnets. Their petals shimmered faintly, fragile, brave, and still standing. For the first time since grief took root, Martha believed the land could love them back. The morning Caleb left for town, the valley was wrapped in low fog. The sun tried to break through, but the light came in pale and thin, the way it does before something changes. He saddled his horse in silence, movements crisp, precise. Martha stood on the porch, apron dusted with flour, a knot tightening in her chest. "You don't owe that man another word," she said. Caleb checked the cinch strap, eyes on his hands. "If I don't speak, he'll take the silence as surrender." Her jaw clenched. "And if you do, he'll twist it against you." He met her eyes then, steady, unreadable. "Maybe, but Red Creek's ours now. Has to stay that way." She wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, but pride kept her still. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and rode into the mist. The sound of hooves faded until it was only the creek again, whispering through the reeds. The hours stretched long. Martha tried to lose herself in work, kneading dough, sweeping the porch, tending to the bluebonnets. But her mind stayed on the road. Even the children were quiet, sensing something in the air. By dusk, thunderheads rolled across the ridge, bruised and low. The wind turned cold. She lit the lamp and glanced toward the trail again. Nothing. Then came the distant clatter of hooves. Caleb appeared through the rain like a ghost, slumped in the saddle, shirt torn, blood staining his collar. Martha ran out as he slid from the horse, catching his weight before he hit the ground. "Dear God, what happened?" she cried. He gritted his teeth, voice low. "Didn't draw on him. Didn't even touch the damn gun." "What gun?" Caleb opened his hand. A gold signet ring glimmered in his bloodied palm, the banker's crest, scorched at the edge. Martha's breath caught. "Is he dead?" "No," Caleb said. "He made sure of that. He fell on his own steps, called witnesses before I could speak." Rain hammered against the porch roof. The sound swallowed everything but their breathing. She helped him inside, cleaned the wound near his temple, a cut from a thrown bottle, not a fight. When he tried to stand, she pushed him back down. "You're not going anywhere till you tell me exactly what he did." He stared at the floor. "He said Red Creek's water runs under his deed. Said the law'll catch up to me sooner or later. I told him the law's supposed to serve the land, not own it." That's when he laughed. "Said he already owns the men who write the laws." Her hands trembled. "So this was never about debt?" "No," Caleb said bitterly. "It's about the water. This whole valley. Always was." Hours later, thunder gave way to knocking, hard, official. The deputy stepped inside without waiting for permission. His coat was soaked, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "Caleb Danner," he said, voice formal, tired. "I've got a warrant for your arrest. Attempted murder of Joseph Carr, issued an hour past." Martha stood between them before Caleb could rise. "He never drew on him," she said. "You know that." The deputy's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Caleb. "I don't doubt it. But the man's got witnesses swearing you did. Says you pulled iron in his parlor, grazed his shoulder before he fell." Caleb shook his head. "He fell because he was drunk on his own lies." "I believe you," the deputy said quietly. But belief don't carry weight when money talks louder. He hesitated, lowering his voice. If you've got proof, you best find it fast. He left the papers on the table, rain dripping from his hat brim. When the door shut, the room felt smaller, the fire dimmer. Martha stood still, her breath shallow. Caleb tore the warrant in half, but his hands trembled after. He wants me to run, he said. Makes it easier to call me guilty. Then you won't, she said. He looked up at her, eyes hard, tired. You trust me that much? She nodded once, enough to know you don't fight for yourself. You fight for what's right. Outside, the storm finally broke, lightning splitting the ridge in two. The bluebonnets by the window bent but didn't break. Martha watched them sway and thought. The truth bends the same way, fragile but alive. She turned back to Caleb. Then we fight smart. For the land, for the water, for the name you still deserve. He exhaled, the tension easing just slightly. Then we'll start at dawn. Night came early that day, heavy clouds pressing low, wind cutting sharp from the north. The kind of stillness before a storm that makes animals restless and men reach for rifles. Caleb felt it in his bones before he saw it. He'd been walking the fence line, lantern swinging, when he caught the faint glow flickering beyond the ridge. Not lanterns, flames. He broke into a run. By the time he reached the rise overlooking the valley, fire was crawling through the grass, long orange fingers feeding on the dry outer fields. The banker's men were at it again, riding the perimeter with torches, laughing like devils at their own work. Smoke curled skyward, red and black, painting the stars away. He turned his horse downhill. The cabin was still dark. They hadn't reached it yet. Inside, Martha had already caught the scent. She opened the door to see the horizon burning. The reflection of the fire flickered across her children's wide eyes. "Mama," Eli whispered, "get your sister under the bed." "Don't come out unless I say." Her hands shook as she pulled her husband's old rifle from its hooks. The wood was dry, smooth from years of use, the barrel cleaned last winter out of habit she never meant to keep. She checked the chamber, one shell, then two more from the box in the drawer. That was all she had. A horse neighed somewhere outside. Panicked. Then came voices, rough, drunk, confident. "Dana's got to be here," one shouted. "Smoke him out!" She moved to the doorway, heart hammering. The wind carried sparks across the porch. She could feel heat already creeping in from the fields. The first man burst through the haze, face wrapped in a bandana, pistol raised. "Where's your man, widow?" He sneered. Martha leveled the rifle, thumb against the hammer. "Right here," she said. She fired, a warning, but close enough. The bullet tore the brim from his hat, spinning it into the firelight. He stumbled back, cursing, eyes wide. "You'll burn this land over my grave," she said, voice steady. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then a second rider shouted from the dark, "She ain't bluffing!" The man turned and ran, disappearing into smoke. From the far side of the ridge came a new sound, hooves, fast and furious. The herd. Caleb was driving them, the thunder of their charge rolling through the valley. The flames caught their shadows, making them look like ghosts galloping through hell. He burst from the smoke, coat torn, eyes blazing, swinging the reins hard as he turned the cattle straight toward the attackers. The men scattered, shouting. Horses screamed and bolted, torches falling into the grass. The herd plowed through the burning edge, trampling the fire under in a wave of chaos. Martha stood at the door, rifle still raised, breath ragged. Caleb rode past her, leapt from the saddle, and ran for the barn. "We can't let the roof catch." Together they dragged wet burlap across the shingles, choking the sparks before they took hold. Smoke stung her eyes, but she kept working, coughing and cursing and praying all at once. When the last of the fire died down, the valley fell silent again, except for the hiss of cooling embers. The outer fields were gone, blackened to ash. But the cabin stood, and so did they. The deputy rode up through the haze, face streaked with soot, badge glinting. He took in the ruin, the bodies, the horses, the smoke. Then found Caleb standing in the wreckage, shirt torn, gun holstered. "Banker sent them?" he asked. Caleb nodded once. The deputy sighed, long and tired. Law says I should take you in. Half the town says you're guilty. The other half says you're the only man still got a soul." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then pick which half you believe." The deputy studied him for a moment. Then he pulled his revolver, spun the chamber once, and slid it back into its holster. "Ain't my night for arresting ghosts," he said. He turned his horse toward town and didn't look back. Martha stepped beside Caleb, hair loose, face smudged with ash. Together they watched the ridge glow with dying embers. The wind carried the smell of char and smoke and victory, bitter but clean. She touched his arm, voice barely a whisper. "You saved us," he shook his head. "No, you did. I just brought the storm." Behind them, the bluebonnets near the window swayed in the hot wind, edges singed but still standing. The dawn came gray and cold, carrying the smell of burned grass. The valley was quiet again. Too quiet. That strange stillness that follows a storm and waits to see what survived. Smoke still curled from the far fence line, the earth blackened and wet. Martha stood on the porch, her hands shaking around a cup of coffee gone cold. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat on the rail, hat low, staring out at the ruin. The fire had spared the cabin, but not the land. The herd was scattered, the fences broken. Every inch of Red Creek bore the mark of battle. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become its own kind of language, the kind you learn when words fail but trust remains. Then the sound of hooves broke the calm. Not one horse, several. Caleb rose, already knowing. Down the trail came the sheriff, flanked by 2 deputies and the banker himself, alive, though his coat was scorched and his arm bound in a sling. His face was pale with self-righteous anger. The sheriff looked tired, old, caught between duty and regret. "Caleb Danner," he called as he dismounted. "You're under arrest for assault and arson. Mr. Carr here's made his statement." Martha stepped forward, her voice sharp. "He's lying. His men lit those fires. We fought to keep them from burning the valley to the ground." The banker smiled thinly. His voice came oily and smooth. "You people always did have a way of twisting facts, Mrs. Hale. Shame your husband ain't here to vouch for your honesty." Caleb's eyes darkened. "Watch your mouth," the sheriff gestured to his deputies. "Tie him to the post. We'll take him in when the wagon comes." The rope went around Caleb's wrists first, then looped high across the hitching beam. They worked in silence, practiced, careful, but not cruel. When they dropped the last coil around his neck, Martha moved forward, shaking. "You can't do this," she cried. "You know he didn't start that fire." The sheriff looked at her with sorrow. "Ma'am, I know what I saw after, but law's got a way of believing the loudest voice." The banker stepped closer, boots crunching on ash. "The law believes the truth, and the truth's what I say it is." He reached into his pocket and pulled something out, her wedding ring. He tossed it into the dirt between them, the gold dull under the morning light. "Your husband owed me," he said. "Debt's a debt, Mrs. Hale. You and your hero here don't change that." Martha froze. The sight of that ring, the one she hadn't seen since the auction, struck like a blade. Her knees almost gave. "You stole that from him," she whispered. The banker laughed. "Borrowed, collected, same difference." Caleb's hands tightened against the rope. A flicker of something old rose in his chest. Not rage exactly, but the kind of clarity men find in war, when they realize there's only one way left to stand. "Sheriff," he said quietly, eyes locked on the banker. "You remember Copper Pass?" The old man stiffened. "I remember." "You remember what happens when men take more than they're owed?" Before anyone could answer, Caleb twisted his wrists hard against the post. The rope slipped. He'd been working it loose the whole time. In one motion, he ducked low, looped the slack around the nearest deputy's arm, and yanked. The man stumbled, his pistol firing harmlessly into the dirt. Caleb spun, using the rope like a whip. It cracked across the sheriff's gun hand, sending his revolver skidding away. The second deputy reached for his rifle but froze when Caleb's boot came down on it. "Enough!" the sheriff shouted, clutching his hand. But Caleb wasn't looking at him. He strode toward the banker, slow and deliberate. The man backed up a step, tripped over a root, and landed hard. Caleb knelt, picked up the ring from the dirt, turning it once between his fingers. "This is what you fight for?" he asked. Metal and memory? The banker's lips trembled. The law— Caleb cut him off. The law is what we make it. He turned toward the smoldering field, the sky brightening to gold at the edges. Then, without another word, he hurled the ring into the ash. It spun through the air, caught a spark from the dying fire, and vanished. Some debts end here, he said. For a moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the sheriff stepped forward slowly, rubbing his wrist. You done making your point? Caleb nodded once. Done. The sheriff looked at the banker, who sat on the ground panting, eyes wide with something that looked a lot like fear. You got your statement, the sheriff said. Now get off this land. The banker's mouth opened, but no sound came. He turned and staggered toward his horse, climbing up with his good arm, then rode off without another word. The deputies waited for orders that never came. Finally, the sheriff waved them off. Untie him, he said. I don't see a crime worth hanging a man for today. Martha stood frozen as Caleb rubbed the rope burns from his wrists. Their eyes met, hers full of tears, his unreadable, steady as ever. The sheriff adjusted his hat. You best keep that fire under control, Danner. Both kinds. When they left, the valley was silent again. Only the wind whispered through the scorched grass. Martha bent to the dirt where the ring had fallen. All that remained was a faint circle of soot, a ghost of gold. She pressed her fingers to it, then to her heart. Caleb stood beside her, voice low. No more debts, she nodded. Only promises. And for the first time in years, the morning sun rose clean over Red Creek. The weeks that followed passed quiet and slow, the kind of peace that feels like the earth catching its breath after a long cry. Rain came gentle, not fierce this time, and the creek rose clear through the valley. The blackened soil softened, taking seed again. Red Creek began to bloom. The children were the first to believe in spring. Eli chased butterflies through the garden while his sister filled a tin pail with wildflowers, her laughter echoing between the hills. Martha hummed as she worked, her hands buried deep in the soil of Grace's ground. The hymn was old, half forgotten, but it fit the wind that moved through the valley. Something about mercy, about home. Caleb repaired the fences along the east field, hammer echoing slow and steady. Each nail driven into the wood felt like reclaiming something the fire had tried to take. His shoulders had healed, though the rope burns at his wrists still showed faintly. Reminders of the morning they'd nearly lost everything. Sometimes, he'd glance toward the ridge where the flames had been worst, where the earth still bore scars. The banker hadn't returned. No riders came down the trail now. The law had gone quiet too. For the first time in years, Red Creek belonged to itself. That evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon, Caleb walked the fence one last time. Smoke no longer haunted the air, only the scent of pine and earth. His boot caught something half buried near the fire's edge. He knelt, brushing away ash until a small glint of gold appeared. It was metal, warped and melted, fused into a strange shape. Not a ring anymore, but something resembling a bird, wings spread, body bent mid-flight. He turned it over in his palm. The banker's seal was still faintly visible along one edge, softened by heat into something unrecognizable. A symbol, he thought. Maybe a punishment, maybe grace. He carried it to the garden and crouched beside the bluebonnets. They were blooming wild now, stretching up through the ashes like the land itself had chosen forgiveness. He placed the small metal bird at their base, half hidden among the roots. Martha's footsteps approached behind him. She knelt beside him without speaking, dirt on her hands, hair falling loose around her face. Her eyes found the bird, then lifted to his. You kept your word, she said. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head softly. No, you gave it meaning. A breeze swept through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. The bluebonnets bent and swayed, rippling like ocean waves. The children's laughter floated from the porch. Eli pretending to be a cowboy, his sister chasing after him with a stick for a rifle. The sound was light, unburdened. Martha rested her hand over Caleb's, both of them watching the petals move in rhythm with the wind. You ever think peace can last out here? She asked quietly. He smiled faintly. Doesn't have to last, just has to come back. The sun dipped lower, gold turning to violet across the hills. The valley shimmered in that soft light. Every scar turned to silver, every wound made part of the story. Caleb rose, dusted his hands, and looked toward the horizon. Not searching this time, just seeing. Looks like Red Creek's found its heart again, he said. Martha nodded, standing beside him. Maybe we all have. The camera would have pulled back then, high above the cabin, above the fence lines and the winding creek. The garden glowed against the dark earth, a single patch of blue among the gray. At its center, the melted bird caught the last light of day, glinting faintly like it might take flight once more. The wind whispered through the valley, soft, endless, alive.